Now that you know your way around a UV editor, it's time to unwrap your first model. This is the first step where your 3D surface gets flattened into clean UV islands, and it's the foundation for getting sharp, predictable textures. In this video, we're going to walk through the basics of unwrapping process and use a few essential tools to show how everything comes together. You'll see how to select faces you want to unwrap and apply the wrap unwrap method for the shape and make some quick adjustments so that your initial layout is clean and ready for refinement. We're not going to cover every single tool here, just the core ones you need to understand how unwrapping works and how UModelerX keeps the process fast and intuitive. Once you have this first step down, the rest of the UV workflow becomes much easier. So let's jump in and unwrap your first model. All right, so here in our scene, I have a simple object here that we're going to use to kind of demonstrate a few of the tools that you can use with the UV editor. Now, to get started with the UV editor, all you need to do is go ahead and select your object. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and select it, and then I'm going to head over to the right side in the inspector and click on this button here where it says editor. When you click that button, you should see UV editor, painting 2D, and hotspot editor. Go ahead and click on UV editor. Once you open that, you're going to have a new window here, and you can go ahead and actually prop this up anywhere you want. I'll just go ahead and put it right here. So in here, this is going to be your layout. You have the toolbar at the top here, and if I hit this gear icon, you're going to have some settings you can play with, and then below that, you're going to have your workspace. Now to the right of all of that, you're going to have all your different tools. And you can actually collapse these different groups just like so. And that is very similar to the different groups in terms of your actual inspector for your game object. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and click on these again so that we can see our different tools for our UV editor. And the next thing, let's just take a quick look. So what I'm going to do is click on scene, and back in my scene with my game object, what I want to do is click on faces, and then I'm going to select all my faces. Now I'm going to go back to my UV editor, and in my unwrap group, we're going to go ahead and just click on the cube for now. And then we're going to click on unwrap. All right, great. So once you actually click on unwrap, you're going to basically get like an automatic unwrapping, and this could actually work for your game object depending on how simple it is. This will be completely fine for you to continue on and do any texturing or things like that. But I just want to go ahead and do this just for demonstration. All right, so at the top we have our toolbar. I'll go ahead and collapse this. You have your pan tool here. You have your selection tool. You have your rotation. So rotation is going to allow you to rotate whatever selection you have. You're going to have your ability to scale, so you can scale that selection as well. Select just the verts in this area. This is actually more like a rectangle selection here, and so we can do something like that. That's kind of how that would work. So anything that's selected in this regard, you would be able to kind of change it and adjust it like so. I'll just go ahead and go back. But with the vertices specifically, what we can do is select these. So you have your vertex, your edge, and your face and island. So I'm going to go ahead and select verts. And if I click verts, then you can actually go ahead and actually move individual vertices. Edges, you can go ahead and move those as well. That's very useful. And you have your faces, which you would expect to be able to select your different faces. Now, another one is the island. So this is great because it's going to help you when you select one face that's part of the whole, you'll select everything there. So if you needed to separate something like this, say you have a bunch of different like faces on top of each other, and you can't really get to them like this because say you try to select, but then like you're selecting everything here. A really good use is the island. So now I can just select something in the group and I can go ahead and separate those much easier. So I can go ahead and say, oh, you know what, I want to go ahead and move this over here. I can select this and move this down here and so forth. Awesome. And then you have your UV channel. I usually leave that at 0. Awesome. Now, what we can do is go ahead and take a look at some of the settings for those. So we can click this little gear icon here, and you're going to have your snapping, which is self-explanatory, but it's basically world snapping or increment, or you can move based on pixel. And of course, if I have this selected, you can go ahead and see the boundaries. You can do fill polygons if you want to see that. These are basically like display things here. You can basically show the grid, you can show the axis, you can show the texture that's actually currently assigned to that object. I'll go ahead and turn that off. You can enable an alpha channel, you can change the texture X and Y, and then you can adjust the material. So what I'll do is just leave everything just like this for now. And then on the right side of our screen, we have our tools. Now with our tools here, what I'm going to do is go ahead and hit cancel on this. So what I'm going to do is select all of these here, and I'll just actually start with this tool. So the cancel tool generally is going to let you reset your UV layout here. So you almost like you're starting from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. And if we go back to our scene, everything is exactly like we would expect, and we can go ahead and begin using that. And so now with that, we have different things. So before you actually use any of the unwrapping tools here, you definitely want to make sure that your game object has all its faces or UVs, I guess, that we're going to actually generate. All right, and so now that we do have that selected, the first one is going to be the plane. So the plane tool is simply going to take your game object and basically flatten it out. So there's a few options here. We can do a projection on the normal, we can do it based on the view, or you can break it down individually to those faces. So I'll click on unwrap. And if you notice the way it was unwrapped, it's based on the view. So if you look at my view, that's generally kind of what it's doing. That's kind of how that is. So if I unwrap it again, it's going to change based on the view that I have. So this could be useful if you need to unwrap it in a particular way. And so that's actually pretty cool. So I'll just go ahead and do that as well. Now, if I do individual, it's going to break up all of those based on that view, but it's going to take all of those faces and completely break those down. So that could be another tool in your disposal to be able to use. Now you can do this based on the normals as well. So normals is based on the direction that the normals are facing on your mesh. So if I were, for instance, to go into my normals here, so face normals here, and we can actually display the direction that our normals are facing. And so this is just an example of just understanding the faces are your normals and they're facing out. And so therefore the faces here are based on the normal. So I'll go ahead and take that off just like that. And then we'll just go back on our UV editor. Now I'm going to select all these again, just like so, and continue on. So next we have the cube option here. And now the cube option is different because it's going to actually generate the UVs based on the X, Y, and Z coordinates. So what we're going to do is go ahead and select cube, and then you have the ability to hit unwrap immediately. And so this is the original one that we had. And so it's basically taking the view in almost like a camera view from different angles, up, down, left, and right. And it's going to then break that mesh down and give you something like this. So this is really helpful for very simple objects, and it gets the job done very, very, very quickly. Now, of course, you can do a selection on all those individually and still do an unwrap and get something very similar to the previous one. So that's a nice addition. So what we can do is do auto unwrap as well. With the auto unwrap, it's basically going to, based on the actual selected faces, it's going to stretch the UVs based on that. So as an example, I'll just go ahead and go in here and select, I'll just select some different faces like this, and maybe this will help demonstrate it a little bit. And I'll just go ahead and go back in my UV editor, and then I'll hit auto unwrap. And so as you can see, we're going to take those faces and unwrap just those. Now we could do some additional things. So as you can see, I have this unwrapped, but it's still connected to this one. So there is a very handy tool called the detach. So we could hit detach and we can actually detach that from there and so forth. So that's actually pretty useful. And then you can just start to actually use these tools in your way. So yeah. And then another tool that you can use, which I like a lot, is the LSCM. This one is typically used for more natural objects. So let's take a look at that. So what I'll do is go ahead and select all of these faces. I'll hit cancel and go ahead and select all of these. So if I were to select this cylinder, right, and I go into my UV editor and I select LSCM, what it's doing is simply just taking the object and projecting those. But there is a key difference here. So what I'm going to do is go back in here and I'm going to select the edge tool. Now inside of this here in your inspector, down at the very bottom in the surface group, you have something called mark your UVs. So if I were to select all the edges of the bottom and the top and I hit mark UVs, if you notice, it highlights these edges. And what that's ultimately doing is creating a split. It's kind of cutting the UVs, but it's not actually separating those. And so this is going to help that other tool unwrap much better. So for instance, what I'm going to do is do this just to show you how the result is. I'm going to select all of these faces, go to UVs, and then I'm going to hit LSCM. Now, what you notice is that these two pieces that I had unwrapped or created the seam for, it unwrapped properly. Now, what's happening though with this piece is if I select just these faces here in our work area, we go back in our scene, all of those is there, but that's not a proper unwrap. So what I'm going to do now is create an additional seam. So what I'm going to do is select a seam right down this here. Now, when it comes to actually marking seams for like a game object, sometimes you want to make sure that the seam is in a place that isn't in front of the camera, because sometimes the textures for seams don't always blend well. So you just want to be mindful of where your seams are. So what I'll do is go into UV editor, and now actually, let me go ahead and make sure these are marked. Select those edges, mark those seams, and now we're good to go. Now I'm going to select that, and now I'm going to go ahead and hit LSCM. And if you noticed, now it's perfectly lined up exactly the way that we would expect it to be, and it looks really good. So that's a very, very good way to utilize the LSCM. And what's great about this is because that works really well when you're working on characters. So imagine this is like the arm of a character and you wanted to unwrap that arm properly. So in this case, you would create maybe a seam in a certain place so that you can completely unwrap that character arm and you can do your texturing that way. So that's a very useful tool. Now, one of the last unwrapping tools here is the pelt tool. So the pelt tool is interesting. All it really does is relaxes the UVs in a particular area. So for instance, I have these here. If I use the pelt tool, it's going to relax the UVs. It just really depends on the type of setup you have. So maybe if I create a different type of object. So what I'll do is create a new object, primitive shape, and I'll do something like maybe a sphere, and I'll go ahead and create this sphere like so. And what I'll do is now, actually these are connected. So let me go ahead and actually create a completely separate game object from that one. And I'll just go ahead and create that sphere. So go click here and bring that guy up like so, and then I'll select that just like that. So if I were to say create a line here like that, and I'll go ahead and add a mark seam for that. So now we have a line after what we just learned with how the other one works. So what I'll do is go ahead and do the LSCM. And so now we have that split. Now again, see how easy that was to do that. So this is going to be probably your next favorite tool. So now with the pelt here, we can go ahead and use that. So for instance, we can use the pelt here, and we can actually, if you notice, it's a small shift. It's hard to really notice because it really is already well done here, but we can do like a high pelt. Maybe there's iterations that it takes. It's hard to really see, but if I were to move this maybe kind of like this, and maybe I use the pelt tool to help adjust this, maybe that will give us the result that we're looking for. If you notice, it started to relax those just very slightly. And so that's going to be very helpful to kind of fix any issues that you might have with your vertices when they're kind of overlapping and things like that. So that's going to be very helpful. So like if I had these verts here and something like this and maybe something like that, and I just don't want that to behave that way, I can select these here, hit pelt, and I can just start to relax a lot of these, and it will just really help clean things up. And that's really what all of this is really about, is really just relaxing and just really using these tools to help organize these things. Now we do have a few other tools to look at, and so we're not going to cover every single tool, but it is worth mentioning a lot of these different tools here. So for instance, I'll just go ahead and go back to our cylinder here. And with this cylinder, I'll just go ahead and select all these faces and go back into the UV editor. Now, looking at our UVs set here, we have our selection. So if I were to have nothing selected and hit select all, this is simply going to select all of the UVs in this area. Now, if I hit invert, in this case, it's going to unselect because it's inverting the selection. But if I were to select just these few and then I hit invert, as you can see, it's just inverting the selection. Now, for instance, if I were to say go to the edge tool and I want to do a loop, you notice it selected the loop as opposed to just that one. And so for instance, if I select the edge here, it should create or select the loop there. It just depends. There we go. And so now we created or selected that loop. Now, in terms of the shared, so for instance, you'll see that if I select this edge here, if I hit shared, it's going to select the shared edge there. So if I select this here, it's going to select the shared edge. So it's going to be here and here. So this here and there. And so now if I select that, it's going to select just like that. Pretty easy. And then next we have the flip, the horizontal, vertical, center. And these are really just kind of allowing you to change the direction of a UV. So we can flip it like so, or we can do it horizontal. We can flip the center. We can do it 90 degrees, or we can do it negative as well. So those are just different tools that you have at your disposal if you need to flip something. It just kind of depends on the direction in which you need. So awesome. Next, we have the different alignment tools. So for instance, we can do different alignments. We can say, for instance, we want these two to be aligned towards the top. I can select these two faces and hit the top, or I can do like something like the center, or I can do the bottom, move that one down to the bottom. But this doesn't just work with the faces. You can do that with different things like vertices as well. So for instance, say we need to get all of these in a straight line. In a lot of cases, instead of say trying to move this and do something like this, we don't want to do it that way. We want to use the alignment tool to do it just like that. And that makes it really easy. So you can take that and start to create that. And so these are very simple tools, but very powerful tools that you can have at your disposal. Next, we can also mess with weld and break group. So this is pretty good because what you can do is attach different vertices and weld things together. So for instance, if I have these two selected, we can weld to the first one, so we can kind of do something like that. Or if we want to weld all these together, weld them all to the center, we can do something like that. Another useful one is to detach. And so for instance, if I want to detach these, so I don't want this like that, I can actually say, I don't want all of these part of this group. So I want to move it. I can just hit detach, and it's actually going to give me the ability to separate those UVs from that set. And so we're good to go. And now with the island, we actually can basically you create your own individual islands as needed. Awesome. Now, in terms of the arranged group, you have pack and you have fit. So if we were to say select all of these here in our area and we hit pack, and we can pack it just like so, it's going to take all of these UVs and do more of a convenient packing for us to kind of get it all tightly put inside of the one-to-one UV space. And that's basically from this edge to this edge, and this little square basically is going to allow you to simply pack that into there. And you can also have different padding depending on how much you really need that to fit within that space. Now, if you do fit as well, so you can do a margin on that. And so you can see, depending on the padding, again, you can do it that way. So that's really useful. Now, one of the last groups we can take a look at here is going to be the miscellaneous group. And this is just really simple. All you would need to do is use this is to export. So you would just basically hit export, and what that's going to do is give you the ability to save this out as an individual image file so that you can use this in another software or within this software to do any additional painting as needed. Well, that's it. That's the basic setup for unwrapping in UModelerX. With just a few tools, you can generate clean UV islands and start shaping a layout that's ready for texturing.